Hello, everyone, to our first lunchtime conversation of 2023. I can't believe it's mid-February. Can you, Amanda?
No, it's unbelievable. Where's the year going?
It's so great to connect with you again. Both Amanda and I had voyages and great journeys over the holiday. I was in the UK and she was in Rome, and it was fun to share photographs, but I'm glad to be back home. And it's so fabulous to be here today introducing our great speaker.
Yeah, we are in for a treat today for sure with Ben Denzer, who's in the audience, and I'm going to be introducing him here shortly. Jane, should I do that now, or did you want to pop in?
Absolutely. We definitely are intrigued, and we are in for a treat that might include ice cream, right?
Yeah, we can hope so. And to reiterate, I think Jane just said, please put comments and questions in the chat box. We will come back to those at the end when we have time for Q&A with Ben. So we will be looking at those. And if you're shy, you can direct message them to Jane and she can channel them for you. Now, I met Ben in a roundabout way through a librarian I have here at Whitworth, Sophia Duval, who was going to school at Pratt in New York. She was involved at the Center for Book Arts, and she encountered Ben there. And she said to me, "You've got to invite him to your class that I was teaching last year." And so I didn't realize, and this may be true for many of you as well, that I knew his work and I knew it well. I was a big fan, but I didn't connect the name and the person and the face to the work. And so today I expect some of you will also have that experience, because Ben's work is held in the Met, the Guggenheim, the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, and Oxford, among others, Oxford being dear to Jane and me both very much. Ben is a designer, an artist, a publisher, so he really keeps a wide oeuvre of career opportunities at hand at all times. He has many skills, but it's his book art that I think is of particular love to me. He's studying at RISD and is hoping for a career that both involves teaching and designing. So hopefully he'll talk a little bit about that today. And yes, there's been a mention of ice cream, and we may learn more about that. So Ben, I will hand this over to you, and we are all ears and eyes. I'll let you know if we can't see your presentation. There it is, it's up. So thank you, Ben. Take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Super excited to be here, and I'll just dive right in. So books. So a lot of the things I do, as we just mentioned, revolve around books in various ways. I make my own, artist books and publish them through this press I made called Catalog Press. I design a lot of book covers. I worked for a period of time in-house as a book cover designer at Penguin. I do kind of publication design, not just the covers, but this was things like a catalog for a show at Center for Book Arts 2 summers ago. I also do a lot of editorial illustrations that end up revolving around books. This is the ice cream books that's been mentioned a few times, which is an Instagram where I take books and I take ice cream and I combine the two. And then I also teach. I teach a workshop on artist books for Center for Book Arts, and I was teaching in New York at Parsons and SVA, often classes revolving around zines and artist books. And now, as was mentioned, I'm a student myself at RISD because I like teaching and I want to teach more in the future. So I like books, and I thought I would just share some reasons why. So I, grew up with books around the house, but I really kind of started thinking about books when I was in college. I went to Princeton and studied architecture, and then got kind of a minor in visual arts. And I was assigned lots of readings from books, in these architecture classes. And all of these readings would be from books, but they'd be scans of books, books as PDFs. And it was really just like reading books as PDFs over and over that got me thinking about, like, what are books, and why are they interesting? And I started realizing that, books are interesting to me because they're both content and object. They're both like these singular objects, but they're these dense containers of content. And as a student, I was stuck just reading the content, not experiencing the object. So I was studying architecture, but also doing visual arts. And so on the visual arts side of things, I decided, how could I do something that would emphasize the book as an object? Maybe if I put wheels on books. So I took some wheels, like in the sculpture shop, there was just a bunch of wheels lying around that no one was using. So I grabbed those, I took some books and I started putting them together. These are some ball bearings. And then you get things that can roll around, and all of a sudden the book can roll away from you, so now you're really thinking about it as an object. And I kept digging through the sculpture shop, closet, there were hooks You can make a book that could go in your closet, suction cups, bolting two books together, in this case, to make a really weird vacation, putting nails in books, using nails to kind of shut books. If you can't open the book, you're just confronted with it as this, sculptural thing, drilling holes in books. And so I like books because they're physical. And something else I was doing at school was kind of making books and thinking about the physicality. This was a project where I analyzed this particular garden in England and turned this old book with these spot illustrations of the architectural follies in the garden, turned this into kind of a series of pamphlets that were each kind of the experience of walking through a path in this garden. So this is printed on vellum, and it's kind of like walking through this garden on a misty day. You go from one kind of architectural folly up a path to another, and then you pick the next booklet, and it's kind of a choose your own adventure. And I like books because they have things inside of them. So something I found myself doing in college a lot was going to the old used bookstore, near campus, and getting a lot of cheap used books and, using a Sharpie and drawing into them. I took a printmaking class and made kind of wood blocks and printed into this old, pamphlet from the Met Arms and Armor Department with kind of wood blocks that I had laser cut and kind of printing color back into this black and white thing. And then I was also collaging with books, finding books that had lots of interesting images and kind of, as a student studying art and told, given a little studio space and told to make things, it was always hard for me to just like, what do I want to make? How do I do something like that? And I always found it useful to kind of think of making as responding. So finding these old books and responding to the images within them, and then just making a lot. I just made a lot of collages, and when I was making a collage, it's not like I knew like, okay, if I combine this and this, it's going to be great. Like I never really knew what was good or what was not good. And so I kind of got this belief that if you just do a lot, if I made 500 collages, there'll be like 2 that are interesting for sure. And the quantity will kind of prop up the ones that might not be. So I think quantity is a kind of quality that I like in work. And so I like books because they can be a way of compiling things too. So I made all these collages, and then, I was able to make a book that could hold all of them together, hold kind of scans and printed images of them. And so I like books because they are dense containers. So as an architecture student at Princeton, you have to do a written kind of research thesis. And so my thesis, was this thing that I then got to design as a book. So this whole kind of year of research kind of compiled into this one object. And I also like books because there are jobs around them. I like books because people pay other people to design their covers. And so in college, I kind of took a graphic design class, and through that realized that there's a job where people pay you to read books and think about them and then design, the book covers. And I thought that sounded so great. And so I was super lucky that when I graduated, there was an opening for a junior designer at Penguin. And I kind of quickly put together a bunch of fake book covers and was able to get this job. And I like designing books and book covers because they're all different. It's lots of small, projects. In architecture, I like studying architecture because you get to kind of take these studio making based classes. But if you become an architect, then you spend like a few years, designing a bathroom, and then it takes more years to get the permits and then for it to get built, and all these things. But when designing a book cover, it's like one project that's specific. And then a year later, it's out on the shelf, and I get to explore all of these different things because all these different books are different, and then they actually live out in the world. So these are some book covers I've designed. And I also like designing books because they're a good reason to experiment, and they're a good reason to kind of make things. I find that when I design, it's like sometimes you get stuck like working on the computer, and I just like to make things physically as a way to kind of get unstuck. And then also as a way to kind of find interesting visual moves that it kind of would be harder to do on the computer. So for me, book covers have been this great kind of outlet for kind of physically designing things and physically making things. So these are just some examples of kind of embracing that aspect of, the design life of designing book covers. Like I can't really render, like I don't have the skills to in 3D software make water, but I have water, and I can print out this and I can make a book cover that has water on it. So these are some things along those lines. For this book cover, I wanted to have it feel like it was written on a balloon and popped. So I just did that, and it took a lot of pops to get it not to, just have the right amount of ruining of the cover. These are some other kind of physical experiments. And so sometimes it's a matter of finding like a technique of making stuff. Like here, this is a light table with printed things on top of it, kind of layered on plexiglass, playing with different ways that can work itself into different potential book covers. And so I also like books because they're these small things. They're these small projects that as a book cover designer, I get a lot of ownership over. And that means I can also kind of hide some Easter eggs occasionally. So this is a book where I designed this kind of crowd scene with Andy Warhol in a bunch of different places. And if you look in the very far back, you'll see this is me hiding in this crowd scene of this book cover. This is a book cover I didn't design, but it was someone at Penguin in the office. And it's this book of humorous essays by this person about her dysfunctional family. And this is a photo of her dysfunctional family from the 70s. And when you put people on a book cover, you have to get their permission, to be on the book cover. And this cousin didn't want anything to do with this project. So how do we solve the problem? Like everyone loved this cover, but we couldn't have this person there. So how do we solve this? This is actually my face on this book cover hidden here. So these are some of the reasons I love, designing book covers. I also like books because they have this recognizable form and it's something, you can play with. This is one of my favorite book covers I've designed recently, which is a cover for a nonfiction book about how Amazon has changed the way novels are sold and changed the way novels are written, because they sell things in these specific categories. And so for this book cover, I designed it to, obviously be lots of book spines. So this is the cover. This is the back, which is also lots of spines. This is the unfolded, book, where these are the flaps that are also designed as this kind of shelf of a book. This is the real spine of the actual book. And, I like messing with this form when I can, also when I design kind of publications and not just the cover. So this is this catalog for a show that happened at the Center for Book Arts. And I designed it to be this really tall, book that's about the width of a cell phone. And here the type always fits within these kind of square or rectangular blocks. And there's no hyphenation, but instead the lines just get bigger and smaller as needed to fit all the type. So I like that books have this thing because they're so common and people kind of have associations with them, so that when you make something that's taller, it feels different. When you treat the type differently, it kind of breaks some of our expectations around what books can be. This is a new publication by Center for Book Arts called Book Art Review that I also had the opportunity to design. It's a magazine about kind of a space for kind of book art criticism. And just the one little design move that I'm kind of mostly showing it here for in terms of kind of playing with expectations is I played with how the pages work and where they end. So at the end of each article, when the article ends, I just kind of move everything up to fill the space of how much the article had. And then I move the page number up too. So it's like a normal page number, and the article's done and the page numbers jump up. Just kind of these weird little moves that as a graphic designer, I love kind of playing with what's expected in the form of a book or the form of a magazine here. And so, the fact that people are familiar with the form of a book has also been something I've played with in editorial illustrations, where here kind of just stretching that's a little video that won't play, but that's okay. So playing, that's all right. So seeing how many different ways I can kind of take this one form and push it into different images. How many different ways can I use the form of a book to, mean something else or to point us in a different direction? So these are some spot illustrations of book chairs, each kind of made out of a book. And I also like books because they're pretty mundane. People are used to having them around. And so, as been mentioned at the beginning, when you put ice cream on a book and, photograph it in this way, it's kind of an odd thing because books are this mundane object that we normally just have around without, having melted ice cream on top. And this kind of came from a place of, when I was putting wheels on books, trying to emphasize them as objects. This came from a similar vein. And it also came from working at Penguin and realizing that publishers send out lots of free books to, places like the New York Times and the New Yorker to write reviews. But also they send out free books to Instagram influencers, bookstagrammers, to take photos with nice latte art or matching socks. And so I wanted to make fun of this kind of bookstagrammer world. And so I, put ice cream on a book, photographed it, made this Instagram and shared it. And then it kind of grew and grew and grew. And I was, pretty soon becoming the thing I was making fun of, where I was holding ice cream shop events with, an ice cream shop would make a custom flavor, like mulled red wine ice cream for Stephanie Danler's Sweet Bitter. And then we'd have a bookstore kind of reading signing, but it would be in an ice cream shop. And so there'd be a tasting element as well. This was the back page of the New York Times book review one summer. All these books had sun in the title. This was a fun thing to do. And I also like books because you can make them yourself, as most of you, here know. When I was working at Penguin, I took a class in hardcover bookbinding at Center for Book Arts. And it was the first time that it really demystified the process of making books for me. I was working at Penguin and I thought a hardcover book is the thing that this big company I work for makes in factories. But then you take a class, you realize, oh, it's just 3 rectangles of, material glued onto another rectangle, folded together, and you have a hardcover book. And this was the first time that I really started to realize that, books have a history in the arts and a history of people making them as art objects. And it was the first time I kind of heard this term artist books, which I had no idea, what it was at the time, but I've since kind of come to love. And now I kind of do a whole workshop on this at Center for Book Arts. And you all probably are familiar with the term artist book, which is why you're in this kind of group and on this Zoom. But I feel like everyone has a slightly different definition maybe. And so this is my kind of definition that I like the best, which is, I consider an artist's book to be a book or book-like object that doesn't describe or reproduce an object, but is an artwork in and of itself. And another way I think of this is that the form and the concept of artist books is as important than its concept. And the way I normally explain this in this little workshop I do is I show these extreme examples of, 2 books both published in 1969. So, Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut and Dieter Roth's Literature Sausage, where if you're not familiar, Dieter Roth took a sausage recipe and instead of grinding up meat, he ground up a book and then did the rest of the sausage recipe with this ground up book. And so I present these 2, mostly to say that this is the first edition of Slaughterhouse-Five, this beautiful hardcover book. This is the copy I read in high school, this paperback edition that was part of this wonderful series designed by Karen Goldberg, who, unfortunately passed away just a few weeks ago. And this is the current Penguin edition of Slaughterhouse-Five if you buy it today. And so all these are 3 different physical objects with different covers, different sizes, but they're still Slaughterhouse-Five because it's the contents that's the really important thing that, that matters here. This is the Kindle edition, this is the Audible edition. There's not even a physical form here, it's just an audio file. But we still consider these things to be Slaughterhouse-Five because it's the contents that are the most important thing. These are beautiful covers of translations of Slaughterhouse-Five, which each have, different, they're in different languages. They have physical text, but that text is all in different orders because they're in different languages. And if you compare that to, Literature Sausage, it's hard to imagine the Audible audiobook version of this, what this is so wrapped up in its form and its concept. And so I show these as the 2 extreme examples of artist books where the form and the concept becomes increasingly, important in regards to the content. But as everything, these exist along a spectrum. And so in this class, I kind of have just 500 examples of artist books that I try and overwhelm people with, from Ed Ruscha, using books as kind of a form of a catalog, talking about books as, a sequence and developing a narrative. I think kids' books are a great place where there's lots of amazing forms and concepts being played with. Kids' books have great materiality too. There's things like Braille books and other, formal moves in books that serve a very specific function. And then there's things where we might think of them as kids' books like pop-ups, but there are, amazing artists playing with pop-up books. And I also kind of, in this slideshow, try and get people thinking about a broad definition of books. Books don't have to be a thing that's small. Books could be big. A book could be your shower curtain. Or billboards, I think are kind of books. There's a sequence. There's a pagination to them as you drive down the road. A book could come in a box. A book could come in a bean tin. I think advent calendars, if you've ever used an advent calendar, are a book. If you've ever used a pillbox, I think a pillbox is a book. And, artist books can be really complex, but they can also be super simple, just like one simple move. So it's this term and this medium that I really love. An artist book can be a performance. It can be a form of protest. And then there's a rich history of people taking books and modifying them. you can grow mushrooms on a book. Anyway, these are just slides from this kind of bigger thing, which is this workshop I teach at Center for Book Arts every few months. And I'm going fast because it's a super quick lunchtime talk, so apologies if I'm talking too fast, but I believe in just overwhelming with visuals. Okay, I like books because they're dense containers. And so I took this class at Center for Book Arts, and then I was on their email list, and they have this residency that I applied for and was super lucky to kind of get. And so I used my year of kind of having access to their space to start this small press called Catalog Press. And so all the books I make are catalogs of one form or another, because I like that books, kind of hold things and can collect them together. So for example, this is a book called The Details, which is 2,000 architectural details, just photos I've taken on my phone over the past few years before I made the book, and then kind of sorted according to type of thing. So like circle windows to square windows, and on and on and on. And I really like that books can be a place to kind of collect things, like just these snapshots I've taken over the years, and kind of elevate them by being together. When they're together, they can feel kind of complete and contained. This is a book called Stamp Compositions, which is 3,000 stamps where the image and text has been removed. So if you take a stamp that has like a drawing of George Washington and 5 cents, I removed, George Washington and 5 cents, and all you're left with is these beautiful kind of graphic compositions. And for me, I also like that books can be a place to put experiments. So this actually came about because I was working on a book cover for the collected letters of Roald Dahl. And I had the idea of, wouldn't it be great to put stamps on this book cover? And, but stamps have all these associations of place and time, and I didn't want those on this book cover. So I thought, what if I remove that content? And it didn't really work for this book cover. They ended up going a different direction, but I still loved this idea. And so this led to kind of this project, and kind of I kept collecting stamps, and then the book became a place to put these. So I also like books because they have a sequence. This is 4 flip books, which is a flip book within a flip book within a flip book within a flip book. And so as you flip through the books, the outermost flip book opens, and then the next flip book opens, and then eventually the innermost flip book opens. This is a sequence of words, a catalog of words. This is a short story by Jorge Luis Borges. That's like a paragraph long, typeset 1 word per page, each in a different typeface, and then risograph printed in these 2 kind of vibrant inks. And I also like books because they allow for a focus. So this is a book of 234 acknowledgement pages from books that won the Pulitzer Prize. So here I scanned books that won the Pulitzer Prize. These books being books that part of our culture has defined as like the best books. And then the acknowledgement pages being the place where those, people, those authors kind of reveal their networks. And I think, there's something you can get from kind of focusing in on a specific thing and then showing all of them together. I also like books because they seem official. So this is a book of 20 slices of American cheese, and it contains 20 individual, slices of Kraft American singles, each individually wrapped in plastic. And I like that, if you put a hardcover case around almost anything, it feels like this very official object. And so I made it like an edition of 10 of these. And I also like, that people are used to interacting with books in specific ways. And so, a book of American cheese might be surprising to some people. And it kind of hopefully plays with, expectations. And so I sold a copy of this book to the University of Michigan Library, and their librarian wrote this great article kind of describing how she was talking to the curator and saying, how are we going to preserve this? And the curator looked into it and said, American cheese is like basically shelf stable. At that time, I had my other copies in the fridge, and I was living in New York. So I took one out and put it in the hallway of my New York City apartment building, which is like hot to warm at all times. And like 3 months went by and nothing happened. Nothing changed about the cheese, which made me like very scared of American cheese, or made me just want to like increase my diet to only eat American cheese so that I could live forever, maybe. But we've since learned, after I've like sold these to a few other libraries, that they can serve as petri dishes for people to bring their germs to them. And so I like books because there are libraries, and I like books because you can make them in editions and you can share them kind of widely. They don't have to exist in one place. So this is a copy that was recently in a show at Oxford. And this is in a mini fridge, and the book kind of rotates, showing you itself in a mini fridge. And I like books because there are people who preserve them. This is kind of the ideal way to hold this book, which is in just kind of a low humidity environment. So in here are silica gel packets like you might get in, shoes. But sometimes the book does get a little too moldy. This is a copy at NYU. And I like this book also because all books have a lifespan, but we don't really think of that because their lifespan is typically longer than our own lifespan. So I like that this book has a lifespan that's, hopefully a little shorter than our lifespans. But if it does get really nastily moldy, NYU recently underwent a refresher of the cheese. So the librarians had to go out, to their local 7-Eleven and get some new Kraft American singles, and they replaced the cheese. This has led to some other projects. This is 20 Slices of Meat, where I made this at the University of Michigan. And they have a great deli there named Zingerman's that's kind of famous around town. And so I went there, got the great mortadella slice, as you see here, experimented with ways of binding it together, settled on Gorilla Glue. I didn't have to stop for lunch because I could just eat my scraps. And then this is, inlaying the fat. Mortadella is inlaid fat and pistachios. And so I see Amanda shuddering there. And so the whole book is made of all mortadella and a little bit of Gorilla Glue. And then these are other kind of books as objects, Catalog Press is making books that are catalogs of images and words, but also of other objects, 30 napkins from the Plaza Hotel, 20 Splenda sweeteners, Fortune cookie fortunes, Charmin ultra strong toilet paper at the beginning of the pandemic. Making books of books, 15 mass market paperbacks, 50 mass market paperbacks, an inflatable book jacket, to put around your book, and then you can float in the bath or the pool. I tried to get this into some museum gift shops, and it didn't really work out, but it led to some exciting things at the Whitney Museum. They saw that I had made this book of dollar bills, and they had this Andy Warhol show coming up. And in the show is this piece, 192 $1 bills, where Warhol silk screened dollar bills 192 times. And so I kind of pitched the idea of making a book also called 192 $1 bills. And they kind of went for it. So this was a book of 192 fresh $1 bills. And I pitched the idea of this being an edition of 192 books. So each with $192 bills in them. And they liked the idea, but that's a lot of money to, go into the material cost for these books. So they gave me enough money to make 16 copies of this, even though we said it was an edition of 192. And then we put it into the gift shop and we'd see how it went. And I also like books because people are used to buying them. They have places to buy them. And so we put it in the gift shop, and I got this email 3 days later that said, oh my gosh, they've sold, 13 of them, just make all of them. And so then it became this frantic dashing around Manhattan to try and go to all the Bank of Americas and get fresh $1 bills, which is kind of a hard thing to get at banks at times. And then I frantically made as many books as I could, eventually got to 192, and they sold out, which was super exciting. So I got to make some more books, like 5 ketchups. Andy Warhol filmed himself eating a cheeseburger with, Heinz ketchup. This is a book that relates to this Warhol piece, this kind of sensational newspaper headline as a painting. So each page of this book is a historic newspaper headline. So this is page 14. This is page 15. This is page 16. This is page 17. And then this has led to some other kind of books made in response to some shows at the Whitney. There was a show on kind of Mexican muralists and their impact on North American art. And this is playing with Diego Rivera's Detroit Industry Murals, which is this amazing, dense series of murals in the DIA in Detroit. And I took kind of almost every kind of figure from that mural and isolated them one per page. So you kind of see them each at full scale. And I also like books because they've led me to interesting places. I was recently an artist in residence at this place in Cambridge, Massachusetts called the Broad Institute, which is a genetic and genomics kind of research center. And I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to show you images of these books, but I made some books after kind of talking to the scientists there and seeing all the interesting things that they're up to. One of the big books I made there was a book of 60,000 immortal individuals. So it kind of catalogs the known information about people whose cells are used in scientific research. And as long as their cells are kind of kept in the fridge and kept fed. They can kind of live forever. And most of the information about these people is anonymous, but there are some kind of stories we know, like Henrietta Lacks, who was the first person whose cells were kind of made immortal in this way. And there's kind of some ethical things around her case. But that's this big book. This is a book cataloging all of the kind of machines that they have at this, science research center called the Broad. And they have all these machines and they've given them all fun names and name tags. That was really surprising when I first visited, because I expected like this stodgy science institution, but really it's these people who just are working with all these machines and they give them names from, culture. And this is the Christopher walk-in freezer. And it was super interesting to see the cultural references that they would, grab for and gravitate towards. And I guess the last project I'll share with you is that I like books because they can be a reason to, do something or to experience something. So this is a book I made called 6,000 Dandelions. And I was kind of had this mini artist in residence position at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And so, making this book allowed me to kind of spend, 2 weeks in the cemetery during the time where dandelions are there, just briefly before they turn into seed and blow away. And I just picked as many dandelions as I could. Which kind of stains your hand yellow if you're curious. And then I, pressed them and dried them and figured out a way to kind of laminate them between clear plastic sheets. And then, spiral bound them in the same way I spiral bound that kind of bigger book that I just showed you, which is kind of spirals together to make this large book containing 6,000 dandelions. And so this is just kind of flipping through some of the pages there. And now it's 6:35, which is the time when I think we wanted to have time for some questions. So maybe I'll leave it there. I know I kind of talk fast, but just wanted to show a lot. So thank you all for being here.
Absolutely. I mean, you said quantity is quality. You definitely gave us a lot of quantity. Ben, I will kick us off with a question, and I encourage others to put questions into the chat. We already have a few in there that Jane and I can draw from. But Ben, I'm just curious, one thing, I love your work because it tickles my brain and I love my brain to be tickled, but I find that some of your work, there's a great irony to a lot of your work that's humorous, but sometimes I feel like there's a kind of a narrative below the surface, like with your Freedom book that was nailed shut, like there's some commentary going on there, even the American Cheese book and kind of questions around what we put in our bodies, but I don't know how intentional or unintentional that is. I wonder if you could just speak to that really briefly.
Yeah, I think everything in some level is intentional, I mean, there are happy accidents that happen along the way. But I guess, yeah, definitely like that Freedom book, when I was playing with things to do with books, I was looking at books and I was thinking about, okay, I want to nail a book shut. Oh, there's this book that says Freedom. What if I nail that book shut? What is that? I like that there's an additional level of meaning there. Maybe another thing to think about with that is like the ice cream books. I visually just like ice cream on books. I think it's a funny, weird thing, but I always try to have there be some connection between the ice cream and the book. Maybe it's the name of the flavor and the name of the book, or maybe it's just a formal thing with the ice cream. So ideally there's, things exist on both these levels of like the initial humorous, you just kind of get it because it's 6,000 dandelions. But I also like that it's, from a cemetery and then they're kind of arranged in rows and there are happy accidents that happen along the way. Like when I finished making that book, it was 6,000 because I wanted it to be a round number. And that was kind of the amount I was able to gather, like that's how it worked. But when I finished making it, that was around the time of like 600,000 COVID deaths in the US. And, now that's part of, the book story. So sometimes it's a little bit of happy accidents and sometimes it's just kind of always trying to have there be multiple levels of meaning.
I love that. You mentioned the ice cream books and Gail in the chat had asked about the ice cream books. There were a few questions about ice cream books and one was about the copyright. So I think there's this question of, right, you're taking real books and adding the ice cream and photographing them and posting them on Instagram. Was there any copyright concern there or are you creating a fresh work of art? Ergo, you don't have to pay royalties, for example.
Yeah, I think anyone can take a photo of books and post them online, no matter what they're doing with them, because I think it just exists in the world. I mean, I'm not selling anything, so there's not a copyright problem for that. But I think even if I was, it is a fresh work of art. It's just like a collaging with a thing that exists. Yeah.
I love that. Jane, you had a question. Did you want to ask that question?
Well, it's more really a comment, Ben, and I think it's just a general statement. In the beginning of your talk, you spoke a lot about your cover designs, and having worked in graphic design libraries and helped students in graphic design, that's one area that's really underrated. And I think as book artists, we're always talking about getting the word out about book artists, but your cover illustrations and the designs of book jackets are so impactful. And I think that's another area that really needs to be brought to the forefront of discussion in the arts. So I applaud you for sharing that. And I definitely recognize a lot of those images, which was great. And I also just want to say the books on wheels, amazing. And I can't wait to show this presentation to our students, because I think your creativity in taking the book as an object and reimagining what it can be is really impactful. I know we had a couple of chat questions too, Amanda.
Yeah, I'm looking at Victoria's question. Victoria, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question, that would be lovely. If you don't, I can ask it for you, but it's a great double question.
Oh, okay, great. Nice to meet you, Ben. Yes, your presentation is so fantastic. Hopefully, maybe this will be recorded. We can watch it again. It was quick and there was a lot to catch up on. But my question was that it looks like you have done fantastic in the bookmaking if you just sort of dived into that. And so I think all of us were super inspired by that and your journey. So if you want to talk more about that making journey, and also, do you outsource any of those elements, knowing more commercial printing and how that all works together?
Yeah. So I kind of got into it first by taking that hardcover bookbinding class at Center for Book Arts. And can you all see me? Seems okay, good. Sorry, I thought you were very focused. I thought I was frozen for a second. And so the first book I made was that Borges short story with the one word per page. And I had taken another class through Penguin, kind of had this tuition reimbursement program. And so I was in the art department. I took, Penguin paid for me to take this hardcover bookbinding class. They also paid for me to take a risograph class. And so in that risograph class, I risograph printed that book. And then the first book where I really kind of learned how to make was that hardcover, little book of the Borges short story. And my journey of bookmaking was just, making that in an edition of 50, I got better as I went along. So the first ones weren't the best. So then, you get better through practice. And I generally do most of the things by hand. So things are kind of small editions because of that. For things like the 192 $1 bills, because I had to make all of those so quickly after those initial 16, I ended up hiring someone who was working in the Center for Book Arts studio to execute the covers while I, sewed the dollar bills together. And there's been a few other projects where I made a book, an edition of 100, and then I, would pay a friend to help do some of the labor. But in general, things are kind of at smaller, quantities because it's easier for me right now to kind of figure out ways to make it myself. And so I haven't really used many commercial printing things. I've kind of printed where I've been able to have access to a printer.
Ben, this is Jane, and we had a question from one of our members who is very involved in the scientific community as a profession. Well, so that was so interesting, your last series of books where you were at the Institute, and just kind of comment on how you brought science alive and used the machinery and the images. I think that was Jesse, if you want to unmute yourself and further elaborate, that would be great.
Yeah,
no, I think you got it, Jane. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah.
And so I see in the chat, how do you make things scientific things not so boring? And for some of those projects, I know I had to breeze through them, but my interest there was also in using the book as a form where you can, it's not just content, it is this object. So a lot of the things in science now, just quantity of data is a very important thing. And it's something that you can see a number in a paper, or you can understand that there's this many entries in a database, but something a book can give you is it can give you a real sense of that scale. And so that's kind of something I was playing with those books.
Hey, Ben, I love that as a librarian. You might not know this, but next week is Data Awareness Week in the academic community, and I already have an idea for highlighting some of your books.
Amazing.
Well, I think one thing that you touch on that I continue to be fascinated by, I'd love to hear more on is, I know we all get tired in this community sometimes, at times, with definitions and arguing over definitions, but I think it's healthy to revisit them occasionally. And today you said, you were talking about what is a book several times, including the pillbox is a book, and I loved that. That's a wildly liberal definition, and I thought that was fascinating. So I'd love to hear more on that. But also, I noticed you use the word artist, the term artist book, and I've often heard it artist's book, and I suppose that maybe doesn't matter at all. But I'm always caught by those small choices because after a while they sort of, they add up, as you've shown in multitudes of things. So I don't know if you could speak more on those types of categories and definitions, just a couple more minutes on that. I would love it.
Totally. And I think for me, I don't really care much, but I like artist. I think I say artist books, just because it seems to make the most sense to me. Like, I think artists, I hate having apostrophes on the outside of S's anyway. And then it's also like, it's not like it's the artist's book. It's not like it belongs to the artists. And so that's kind of why I've settled on that as the term I use. And then in terms of, I guess I also like just being a little provocative, I guess, in saying that this book of cheese is a book and this, pillbox is a book. Because I think it just opens up. I think there's nothing to be harmed from opening up what a book can be. Yeah, I think it just leads to interesting things. And, describing that in the context of teaching too, I think just opens up possibilities for people to kind of enter into this world and medium. So I like it for that reason too. Yeah,
absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much. Let's see, I'm scanning through the chat here. We've had a few more.
I have a quick question, and so kind of a follow-up to the chat, but I have never heard of a internship in a graveyard, in a cemetery. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how you discovered that and how that came to be.
Yeah, I kind of discovered both of those residencies because I was living in New York, and then my wife started med school in Boston. Once she got in, I started Googling artist residency Boston, artist residency Cambridge, and kind of found these things. But Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge is very historic. It's one of the first kind of landscape cemeteries, in the sense that it's also kind of a botanical garden of sorts. I forget, there's a name of a cemetery in New York that has a similar thing where they kind of have artists do residencies and kind of engage with the landscape and the history. And at Mount Auburn, this program, I did this project, other people compose music, someone put on a play in the landscape. So yeah, it's a really, I think for me, I've been books have been this great way to kind of engage with all these places, because there's a history of books as doing these things, and people understand books, and then you can kind of be unexpected in the ways that you engage with them.
Fabulous. Well, we're reaching the end of our time, so perhaps if there's any last questions, please put in the chat, or let Ben know how much you've enjoyed and been inspired by him before we conclude our meeting.
Yeah, one just popped in. Where do you see yourself in 5 years, Ben?
Yeah, probably still making books in some capacity. As I was saying, I'm at RISD, partially because I want to I think being a teacher and also a maker is this ideal kind of combination of having a community, while also getting to kind of explore one's own art and design practice. And for me, books have been great because they've also led to other things. Not to share the screen and just overwhelm you with more images. But some of these money books have led to other kind of things. This is a book of scratch off tickets, which could potentially be worth $200,000. But some of these book projects have led to things like I made a quilt out of money, and I've been exploring some of the other things you can do with money. This is dyed dollar bills. This is embroidered dollar bills, kind of highlighting the interesting graphic forms on these. These are kind of UV printing on coins. So I like that books have been able to kind of be this focus for me, but I also like that they kind of open up the potential to explore other avenues. And that's some of the benefits of being at grad school too. I can take a paper making class and learn about paper and books, but also make paper with coins in it. And I've been playing with kind of books are made of printed paper often. And I've been playing with printing paper in different ways here, kind of making some editorial illustrations, printing objects like pictures of books, unfolding them, and then making these little book maquettes. And anyway, I don't want to show you too many more images, but these are some of the most recent things I've been doing, kind of playing with printed paper. So I'll hopefully still be making books,
Amazing.
exploring different things around there. And yeah.
I love it. I have a dream that I could have you be an artist in residence. And I would just say, surprise me. And like, who knows what would happen in the library, It'd be marvelous.
So
Yeah.
true, Amanda. Amazing. Wonderful work, Ben. Thank
So
you.
much.
Yeah, thank you all.